Let's take your Blender visual effects up a notch in this video where we're going to be learning how to make this exciting shot. Like always, if you want to follow along with me, I have everything I use including my blend file down below. I hope everyone had a good holiday season and you're ready to learn some new skills this year. Now this is going to be a longer form of video than I usually do, so make sure to stick with me until the end so you can learn all of the exciting stuff I have for you today. So with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and hop inside of Blender. So the first thing I want to go and do is camera track our footage. So go to plus, VFX, and motion tracking, and then let's open the clip. Now I went ahead and converted my video into an image sequence just so it's a little bit easier to work with. So I'm going to hit A and select all of my clips, then open the clip, and it's in the wrong color space, and that's because Blender automatically assumes that you're going to be working inside of the 3D layout. And so with that, with Blender 4.0 and up, it's the AGX color space. That's the default. So I want to change that. Instead of AGX, I want it to be on, if you can see it right there, standard. I'm still dealing with this kind of setup right now, so just stick with me for that, but you do want to be on standard right there. And so now that we have that, we can see the colors are much more accurate, and let's go ahead and set these scene frames and prefetch the footage. Now today I'm basically going to be taking a helicopter and putting it in my 3D world right here, and then adding a couple explosions and stuff. Super simple, however it can get very complex, and you'll see that throughout this tutorial. First thing I want to decide is when the helicopter comes in, because of course over here or whatever, this is going to be very hard to camera track, and so we don't really want to mess around with this area here before. So I'm going to start mine at frame 70. Basically at frame 70 I want the helicopter to actually come away from the building and actually fly up here. So I'm going to set my start keyframe to be 70 down here, and then I know I kind of tilt my camera and it's going to exit frame right around here. So just for safety I'm going to put 200 right now. We can always change that a little bit later if we need to. Of course I'm at 200 instead of 300, so that is looking good. Let's go ahead and start camera tracking. Now I'm not going to be going over all the camera tracking settings for this specific video. If you are interested, I have a camera tracking tutorial that's going to be linked down below. But let's go ahead and match the previous frame. I'm going to hit normalize and then tracking settings extra. I'm going to put the correlation up to a 0.9. All that stuff is just kind of the default stuff I put for any camera tracking I do inside of Blender. Now let's get into more of the kind of, shot specific settings. So if I go ahead and I can control click, I can add a thing, and then Alt S to reveal the search area. Now this is, all right for a majority of the shots. However, I have a lot of camera motion in here, very fast camera motion. And so with that, I have to increase my search area. And so what I'm going to do, let's increase the search size over here. We'll say like around a 90. And now you can see our search area is way bigger. And again, that's because I'm moving my camera very fast. And so in some, frames, it might be actually larger than the default search area. So let's go ahead and delete that. I want to let Blender do the heavy lifting for me. So I'm going to go ahead and have it detect some features at the start of our footage. Let's get some more features. So I'm just going to set the threshold down and the distance to an 80 like that. So we have a ton of features in now. And then let's go ahead, Control T, going to have those track forward. And you can see none of them actually made it to the end of the clip. And so we're going to have to do some special stuff and some different kind of detecting features to get, frames through our entire clip. So let's go to the end. So 200, and then I'm going to detect some more features. Control Shift T to track them backwards, and you can see again it's not reached the end of the clip. And so what we need is we basically need to have 8 markers on the on the frame at one time throughout the entire clip. And so what we want to do is we want to come to areas where there aren't as many tracking markers. So as you can see, like right around here, there aren't that many tracking markers. They're all kind of down here. So I want to go ahead and detect some more features here. Control T, track those forward, and let's go back to that frame, which is 134 for me, and then Control Shift T, just going to track those backwards. And now we have a set of markers basically at the beginning, at the end, and then one in the middle just to fill in that gap of some frames that we don't have any markers on. And so you can of course detect some more features in some different frame ranges. However, I feel like this is a pretty good amount of markers throughout the entire clip that it's going to give us a pretty nice solve error. The other nice thing about this scene is since we're not having any ground interaction or anything, we actually don't need to be super precise with our camera track, just because all of our objects are going to be floating in midair basically, such as the helicopter and explosions. And so with that, we don't need to worry about it sticking super exact like I would normally do for other camera tracking. So let's go ahead and get a solve, because all these points are basically meaningless without telling them where they are in the 3D space. And so with my shot, I actually didn't move from this position. And so instead of selecting an A and B keyframe, we can just go ahead and hit tripod. And then I want to go ahead and refine all of this stuff and solve our camera motion. Now you can see we got a Solvera of a 8.76, and that's decent, but we want to try to get that as low as possible, of course. So I'm going to go ahead and go to clean tracks, and then push that reprojection error. We just want to select just a few here. You can see some of the pink markers and also some of the yellow ones that I selected. We don't want to select too many, because if we select too many, it'll actually delete some potentially good markers. And so we just want to kind of whittle it step by step, whittle it down until we get a good kind of track. So I'm going to delete some of those, solve the camera motion again, and now you can see that we have our Solvera much lower. I'm going to repeat that process a couple more times until we get a low enough Solvera that I'm comfortable with. Okay, so I did it a couple more times. I was able to get my Solvera down to a 1.13, and so that's pretty decent for the scene. Again, it's above 1 pixel Solvera, which isn't that great for ground interactions. However, since everything is flying, we don't need it that accurate. The most important thing is, if you actually bring this graph down here, what you want to make sure is that this blue line, which represents the Solvera throughout our entire thing, is as flat as possible. And so you can see it has some ups and downs and stuff, but again, that is all below basically 1 pixel Solvera, or right around 1 pixel Solvera, I should say. And so if you're having any spikes in some areas, that actually might be a bad camera track, even though your Solvera is relatively low. And so you just want to double check that it's as flat as possible. Mine's relatively flat, and so I'm going to keep it like that. Now we need, of course, set up the 3D scenes, because if I go up here, I'm going to right click and join the areas. We can see we don't have anything set up now. And so let's go down here to set up background and the tracking scene. And now we have both of those set up. We, of course, do not have our, floor defined or anything. So what I'm actually going to do is kind of manually do that. So let's come out to the layout tab now. This is kind of just the default view inside of Blender. We can see that we have all this set up from the actual tracking scene that we told Blender to go ahead and set up. I'm going to just backtrack a little bit, go delete the foreground and background collections. Also, we don't need the cube, ground, or light. So we just want our camera object in there. Let's go ahead and delete the background view layer. And since we deleted that view layer, we also need to delete these 4 nodes right here, and then plug the movie clip into the alpha over right there. And so now we basically have the scene, kind of defaultly set up. The final thing we need to do is go ahead and tell Blender that we don't want to distort our image, because if you remember, we refined the distortion of our actual camera. So we need to tell Blender that we don't want to see that on the actual background of our camera. So let's go into the camera data properties, down to background images, and first I want to change the opacity all the way up just so we can see it a little bit better. And then also right here I want to uncheck this render undistorted. You can see it's basically trying to calculate the lens distortion here, and so since I don't really want that in the scene, I'm just gonna have it again unchecked. And so now we are ready to go ahead and actually rotate our camera. And so what I want to go ahead and do is, let's go ahead and Shift A, add a mesh plane. Just gonna make this out here. And if you remember, we had tracking markers, but we can't really see that for points of reference. So what I want to do is I want to come up here to the display settings. Let's go to motion tracking right there, and now you can see all of our kind of motion tracking dots. And you will see, if I kind of come in the camera view, that we have all of this set up. However, our plane is still kind of floating and tilted the wrong way. So I want to try to get that as accurate as possible. Again, if we were doing normal scene, we would actually go in and try to define the floor plane and all that, but since that's not really important, and we also set it up as a tripod, you can see it's basically just like a semicircle around our camera. And so that's what the tripod setting does inside of Blender. And so let's try to orientate this scene as much as possible. So what I'm going to do, let's create a new tab. I'm going to go into the camera view here, and I basically want to make this as flat as possible without changing the actual rotation of the actual plane here. We want to change the rotation of the camera. So let's select the camera. I'm going to rotate on, let's try the X first. So I'm basically just looking at this floor plane, and I want to try to make that mimic that to the horizon as much as possible. So let's Z. I'm just going to move that down, and then let's rotate on the X. Let's rotate on the Y. And then what I could do is double tap R, and that'll go into the trackball settings just to give us a little bit more maneuverability. And so I'm basically just trying to make this kind of bottom thing as flat as possible. So like that looks pretty good. And then of course let's check it. So G, Z, just gonna move that all the way down here, and that's roughly the ground plane of my scene. Of course you can get really involved into setting it exactly where you want it, but if I kind of move this over here, you can see that it roughly follows the shape of the actual top of this building here. And so that's exactly what I want it. Again, we're not getting too accurate into it because we can actually mess around with this a little bit later. So now that we know our scene is flat, I'm just gonna G, Z, move this up. And now we are actually ready to deal with some of the models of our scene. Now I have a link to download the model, the helicopter model down below. Let's go ahead and do some playing around with that since we want to, make it fly around and actually animate it. So let's open up a new Blender file. And then I'm going to go ahead and just delete everything. And so if you downloaded the file down below, you should have downloaded a OBJ file and an MTL file. And then you also need a textures folder. I believe it also has that as a separate download in the same download subfolder. So you want to go ahead and download all of those since we're going to be importing that into Blender now. And so once you have all of that installed, we need to go up to File. We're going to import in the Wavefront OBJ, and then just locate wherever you saved that. Okay, so here is my folder that I saved it in. Of course, I do have both of these files, so I want to go ahead and basically select both of them. Now, the OBJ is the actual geometry data of the actual helicopter, and then the MTL, I believe, is the materials and how the creator originally put the materials on. So we want to import both of those since we actually want to use the materials that the creator used. And so let's go ahead and import that in. Of course, for our final render inside of our other program, we are going to be rendering as in cycles. And so as you can see, we're in Eevee. So let's go to cycles. I'm going to set GPU compute. Also, real quick, if you want to go to edit preferences, go to system. If you have an RTX card, it's very important that you run it on optics. Make sure you're only checking the GPU. You don't want the CPU since it'll actually render slower. But now that we have that, let's go to the render view. And then just to be able to see everything, I'm going to increase the color of the background to a white color. Then let's go ahead and go to film and transparent just because I don't want that white in the background. And so now we basically have this. We have this pink helicopter looking thing. And if we actually bring out a new window up here, I want to go into the shader editor. You will see, since we did that MTL file, we do have some of the materials of the actual helicopter and stuff. We have all of that over here, and of course nothing is showing up, and that's actually because these textures are going to a different file path. And so you could manually go in all these textures and go into the folder and search them up and everything. What you could actually do instead in a faster method is to go up to File, and then we're going to go to External Data and find the missing files. And so of course the missing files that we need are the textures. And so if you remember, if you downloaded that textures subfolder that it had in the download, you can go into that. We're going to want to go ahead and hit just find missing files right here. And now you can see that it's basically searched throughout all of the materials here and basically found those textures and remapped them to the correct folder location. You will see it's very weird looking right now, and I don't know if this is a lost in translation thing with the MTL file, or if it's something to do with Blender 4.0 being a little bit weird, but for some reason all of them have their basically transmission changed all the way up. And if you don't know, transmission is basically just the ability of the object to see through to the other side. So like glass has it, water has it, all that stuff. So what we need to do is let's come to edit mode, so hit tab, and then I'm just going to go to face selection up here, and we can select the faces, and then I'll select the different materials that the the things are attached to. So what I want to do for all these materials, I basically just want to go in here, go to the transmission tab, and change the weight all the way down to 0. So now if I come out of here, this is exactly what we should be seeing. And again, I don't know what is causing this, but this is kind of the hacky way to fix this. So again, just select the material, go to the transmission, change the weight down to 0, and again, we just want to do that to all of these things down here. Just any ones that look a little bit wonky to you, you just want to come down and do this. I remember when I was doing this, the first time, I was like, why in the world is all of this, being weirdly shaded? Because if you don't do this, it'll basically look like a glass helicopter, which I guess if you do want to do, then, leave it as is. But, it's just a wonky thing that you got to change. It shouldn't take too long, but that is looking pretty good. I don't notice anything else. We can always change it in the other program as well. So that is looking pretty good now. Okay, so once you have everything kind of fixed in the materials, we're actually ready to start animating and breaking these up into different parts. Now I'm not going to be rigging in this tutorial, since rigging is kind of a whole nother beast in and of itself. However, I will be breaking this object into different parts so we can actually affect the kind of rotor rotors up here and back here as well. And so you will notice that the critter, didn't break these into different parts. So we need to actually go ahead and separate the object out into basically 3 different objects. One for the body of the helicopter, and then one for the top blades, and one for the back blades. And so let's go ahead and do that. It's super easy. Let's hit tab, go into edit mode. And then what I want to do in face select, if I go ahead and select this face, you'll notice that it's now in this. And if you see all the blue areas, it's basically, telling the different chunks, and it's basically used for the UV of the actual model. And so we can actually use this to, select the different parts. So if you hold control and press L, it'll actually select the entire part that face is attached to. And so if I G and move that around or whatever, you can see it's the entire blade right here. And so what I want to go and do is let's hold shift, and I want to click all these different parts right here. So just all these different attachments. Don't worry if you don't select one at the first time, since we can definitely go back, kind of select the rest here. So that looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and control L, and you can see it selected all these parts. I did miss some parts, so let's try to select these as much as possible. Just in testing, there are lots of bits and bulbs here. So control L, and you do want to make sure, if you do want to make sure that you selected everything. If you just G and then move that around, you can see that we have missed like some wires here. So let's shift click those, and finally control L, and now if I GZ, we can see that we have the entire basically top blade section selected. And so now with it selected inside of edit mode, if I hit P on my keyboard, we can separate by selection. And now over here we have a new object created that's just the blades. And so let's come out of here, come out of edit mode by hitting tab. Let's select these top blades. I'm just going to name these, we'll just name it top blades for now. And now you can see that we have a new object separated from the body. And so that's going to be useful, so we can actually rotate it separately and not have the body rotate. If I go ahead and try to rotate, so R and then Z, you'll notice that it's only rotating on the origin, and since the origin is this little dot right here, it's rotating around there. And so what we need to do is define a new origin for this specific object. So if I go ahead and right click, we can set the origin, and then I usually like to set it to center of volume. Of course, you can set it to the surface, depending on what you actually need it for, but that seems to have worked. So let's R, Z, rotate, and now if I rotate on the Z, you'll see that it's basically spinning around itself in the center, and so that's very good. Let's go ahead and do the same thing for the back blades now, since it's kind of a very similar process. So edit mode again, let's select this, shift click and select all of these kind of wings right here, control L to select all of those, and then we need to select some of these objects in here. Let's control L, and yeah, so let's just go around and kind of select all of these objects that it hasn't selected yet. And I believe that might be it. Nope, we missed 2 ones over here. So there we go. So now if I G, Z, or move that around, we'll have that separated. We want again P, separate by selection, and now we have a new object. Let's go ahead and name that as well, to back blades. So now we basically have back blades, the Seahawk, and top blades. What I do want to go and do for the back blades, let's go ahead and rotate it, because I don't want it to be angled like that. It's just going to make our animation a little bit easier to do. So what I'm going to do, I forgot to set the origin again. As you can see, it's having that same problem, so we have to right click, go to set the origin, center of mass, volume. So now if I rotate on the Z, so rotate, I think it's the X, no, Y. So if you rotate on the Y axis, you can rotate it basically just so it's up and down. And so that is looking much better now. Of course, now that we have everything separated and we can, animate them separately from each other, we will notice that if we actually move around the helicopter, the other parts are staying in place. And so what we need to do, of course, is to select both of our blades right here. So I'm just shift clicking those. And then we need to shift click the final, actual helicopter body, and make sure that is outlined in yellow, since we're actually going to be parenting those other objects to the actual body of the aircraft. So let's go ahead and control P this time and set parent to object. And so now that we have that, we can move around this little body and the blades will follow it. So that is really good. What we now need to do is actually start animating the blades to spin rapidly. Now if you know anything about animating in Blender, what you could do is set a keyframe right here, a location or rotation keyframe in this case, and then come out to like frame 250 and set another rotation keyframe. I don't want to do that. I want the blades to constantly be spinning no matter how long our sequence is going to go. And so to do that, we can do what's called expressions inside of Blender. And so it might sound a little bit complicated since it's basically coding. However, it's super easy for our use case here. So let's go over to the object properties, and we have all of these transform values. I'm going to start with the top blade since that's the easiest. Now if I go ahead and rotate it on the Z, you'll see that it's basically spinning in place. And so of course what I want to do is I want to make an expression. And so to do that, let's click inside of there. Let's do add a hashtag. And then so hashtag basically is starting our kind of coding sequence right there. I want to do a hashtag frame, and so that's basically going to give a frame number and auto update on every frame. You can see it's rotating pretty well, but it's a little too fast for what I like it for. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to decrease it. And so in order to decrease it, all we have to do is take this frame number that it's going to auto generate, and we need to divide it by 2. And so let's divide by 2, and all that is going to do is basically take that same frame number as before and basically make it twice as slow. And so we'll see there, you can see that it's basically slowed it down a little bit and looks pretty nice. And so that is pretty good. One thing you do have to know is that the blades do rotate in a counterclockwise fashion. And so if you do want to kind of see the blades and make sure they do that, let's go ahead and I'm just going to GZ move that up just so we can see the rotation. And as you can see, it's rotating in a counterclockwise fashion. So let's go ahead and just Control Z undo that. And finally, we need to do the same thing, but for these back here. So we're going to add another expression. I believe we actually need it in the X rotation, but as you can see, if I do the X rotation, it's rotating a little bit weirdly. So what we actually need to do is go ahead and apply the rotation to the actual object, and without getting too complicated, and all that means is that we need all of these numbers to be 0. And so that's super easy. Again, we're just gonna Control A, and you can see we have this apply. Normally you apply the scale. That's what this menu is used for a lot, but in our case we just want the rotation. So again, we apply the rotation, and now you can see that all of those values are set to 0 now. And so now if we move this X value, it's going to be rotating exactly how we want it. And so let's again click inside of here, hashtag frame, and then we'll see how fast that is going to be going. So that's going pretty well. Let's go ahead and divide it by 2 again, like we did for the other one, just so that they're kind of doing it the same way. And so that is pretty good. You will notice though, it might be hard to see for you, so I'll just G move this out. It is going in a clockwise rotation. And so you might be confused on how we actually, get that to go the correct way, which is counterclockwise. And that is actually to make everything right here a negative number. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put everything in parentheses right here. And then at the very start of this kind of, expression that we're doing, I'm going to make whatever is in that parentheses negative. And so let's type a negative number. And then if I press that, we're basically just taking all of that and making it negative now. And so, of course, negative means that it's going to be spinning in the opposite way. And so now you can see that our blades are spinning counterclockwise again and looking really good. And so the nice thing that now that we have all of that set up is that we actually can play the animation, and it'll go on forever, no matter if we have 1,000 frames or 1,000,000 frames or whatever. But if we also G and move this around, now we can see that our helicopter is spinning no matter which orientation, and it's basically just animating the helicopter to be moving. And so that is looking all good. I think we have the helicopter scene done, and we are actually ready to import this into our camera track scene so we can do some visual effects and animating there. And so let's make sure you save the file, and I just have this object right here, so it's just going to be named Seahawk for me. So let's just remember that, and let's come to file. We want to go ahead and just open up our previous camera track scene. So now that we have all this, we need to go ahead and of course import that object in. So let's go to file. I'm gonna go to append this time since we already have it in a blend file. Let's go ahead and append that. We're gonna go into object, and then we're gonna hit A to select all these objects right here and append that into the scene. Now you can see in our Blender file we have the Seahawk right here, and then we also have both of our blades right here. And again, if I do press play, they are going to be spinning, so that is looking good. Now if I go to render view, you'll notice that everything is pink again, and that's because we are in Eevee. So let's go ahead and set cycles again. We want GPU compute. Let's denoise the viewport. I'm going to set it to 128 just so we have fast playback. And then we'll set 256 down here for my final render, just to get kind of fast, renders out since we're still in the creative stage. I do want to go ahead and scale my helicopter down, so S2 scale. And then just going to scale that down roughly around there. We can position it in a little, but that is looking pretty good. I'm going to GZ just shift that up there, or Z, put it like right there. And so now here's the part where we actually have to animate its position and where we actually want it to go. So what I'm going to do is, if you know anything about like the physics of helicopters, in order to go forward, the actual full body has to be tilted a little bit, just so those top blades are at an angle so it can actually go forward. And so let's come up here. I'm just gonna or double tap X, and then we can just tilt it a little bit like that. And so that is looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and position it somewhere like right there. I might actually just bring up another window out here just so we can go into like top view just to play around with that a little bit more. And so I know at like we'll say like frame 80 right there, we want to set a location keyframe. And remember, I am still selecting that body of the aircraft. You don't want to be actually animating the blades, since that's not actually the object we have as the parent. And so now with that selected, let's go to like the end of our footage. So we'll say like 180 for now. And then I need the helicopter to basically just go straight in that direction. So again, just double tapping Z like that. And let's go I location right there. And so now, since we have those basically lined up like that, we can see that we have our helicopter basically, going in a straight line right there. And so, of course, you can play around with the animation yourself. What I actually might do is make the, raise it up a little bit. So G, Z, remember, every time that you make a change, you have to set a new location keyframe. Of course, we can see this helicopter, so I'm going to actually move this back a little bit just so it's obstructed by our building, since that's very important because our helicopter is going to be basically coming over our building. So let's go ahead, I location, and then of course I need it to raise like right there, and G, double tap Z, and then I location there. So let's see this animation. Basically starts like that, goes over top there. Of course, when I was in testing, I did a different animation. Of course, this is like where you want to play around with it. I'm just going to keep it like this, since I could go on for days to, position it in the frame and get, rule thirds, all that stuff. But for this tutorial, this is where I'm going to leave it as. Very important, you do want to go ahead and right click in interpolation mode linear, because that way it's not going to be like a slow startup and a slow end. It's basically going to be a constant speed that the helicopter is moving. And so you do notice I basically stopped it right as it kind of leaves this building or whatever. We don't really care about the animation after that point, since this building is actually going to be obscuring the helicopter. And so now that we have that, let's do another helicopter in the background, just because I think it's a pretty cool effect. So to do that, let's select all of the blades and everything up here. I'm going to Shift D to duplicate this, and then down here with my duplication selected, so all of this stuff, let's go ahead and X. I'm going to delete the keyframes since we want a new set of frames. And so now let's move this around. So I want this to be way in the background here, and then maybe GZ, move that up way up higher. So let's set I location right there, and then we'll say at the end, actually this one I want to kind of like explode in midair, and so we'll say at like 160 is when it kind of will explode. And so we'll say there is our new location keyframe, and of course right click interpolation mode linear. And so now this is basically what we have going on, and it's going to explode up here. So that is all looking good. We can now mess around with some of the actual lighting of our scene, and so you can see it's a gray mess. It's basically the default kind of look inside of Blender. I want to go ahead and add a HDR image, and what that is basically an image with multiple exposure values that has lighting and reflection data baked into it. So let's go ahead and add that in. Super easy. You want to make sure you download that in the description below. Let's come over over to this color, I want to select this yellow dot and change this to environment texture. And then let's open up that HDR image that we have down below. Okay, so here it is. I'm going to click that and then open the image. You can see that our sun is kind of facing the wrong direction right now. So in order to change that, I'm going to bring a new window out here. Let's go ahead and go to the shader editor and then hit N to hide this window over here, just so we can see this a little bit better. Now, right now it's being the object is the shader editor, you can tell up here, but I want to go ahead and select world right here, and that'll basically tell us, show us what the HDRI is doing. So it's basically being plugged directly into our background, which is feeding the surface of the world output. And so that is pretty nice. However, it's rotated the wrong way. And so in order to do that, we need to mess around with this vector section right here. And so of course you can add nodes in yourself. However, I like using a add-on inside Blender that comes default with Blender. So let's go ahead and use that. I'm going to go ahead and go up to Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, and then if you type in Node Wrangler, we'll see this little add-on right here. And again, it comes with Blender, so you just want to make sure that is checked and ready to go. And then after you have that, we can go ahead and hold Control and T, and that'll basically add a texture coordinate and mapping node. The Node Wrangler add-on is basically just a long list of shortcuts and additions to nodes inside of Blender. It's just a great quality of life feature that should be default by now, honestly. And so since we have that, it's basically being plugged directly into the vector. You're going to be using the texture coordinate and mapping nodes a lot if you do texturing and stuff like that. And so what we want to do basically is mess around with this rotation. So I want to grab this rotation, and I basically want to mimic where my sun is inside of my actual footage. So if I come out to solid view, we'll see the sun is basically up here. Let's actually go to the frame where we can see it. So I want my sun of my HDR to be around this area right here. So let's go back up to rendered, and let's go position our sun there, and I might try to move it up a little bit, and then like right there. And so if we go back to solid, we can see that our sun is roughly in the same area. And one thing I will say about this HDR that I have is it's not the best. I kind of wanted to match the lighting as close as I could to the actual sun and everything. However, you can see all this grass and stuff down here. It's actually reflecting some of the grass reflections on the bottom of the plane. Of course, we're going to be removing that in the compositing section, but if you at all possible can find an HDR that matches more closely to the environment you're shooting in, go for it. One thing I will notice is that our HDR is super blown out, and again, that goes back to when we set the color space inside Blender. We set it to be standard. We want to set it back to AGX now, since that is the best kind of color management for CGI, and so our helicopters of course are going to be our CGI pass inside Blender, so we want to go ahead and set that back to AGX, and now you can see that it's not blown out as much as that, and we can actually see the sun, and so that's very good. So now we can set this back to object. I'm just going to keep this window kind of over here in case we ever need to reference it back again. And so of course we can see our HDR image. We don't want to see that. Let's go to film, go down to transparent, and now we can just see our kind of helicopters and stuff up here. What I'm actually going to do real quick is go to my world settings. I'm just going to increase the strength just a little bit, just to match it more to the actual environment. And so now that we have kind of the basic lighting done, let's go ahead and talk about the explosions. Now you can of course do explosions inside of Blender. Blender does have volume capabilities. However, I find it's very finicky, very slow, and honestly doesn't give you that great of results compared to programs like Houdini. However, I actually use a different program called Embergen, and Embergen on their site, Jenga Effects is the company that makes that. They actually give you free VDB kind of sequences that you can use, and all a VDB sequence is basically a sequence of frames of volume files or whatever. So you can see that it basically gives you a frame range like a PNG sequence or something like that. However, it's in a VDB file format, and so that's for volumetrics. And so I believe I went ahead and downloaded the gasoline explosion right here, and then also the midair explosion. And so again, these are free. I highly recommend you guys check out Jenga Effects. I've used Embergen for a lot of my kind of visual effects shots that you have seen on the channel. Some of my composites and stuff that I've done for my own kind of personal work. So it's a great resource. I highly recommend. It's a real-time physics simulating engine, and so it's really great. Highly recommend you guys check that out. let's go back and let's import some of those in now. And of course, if you do know anything about like volumes inside of 3D, it's a very intensive task. So I'm going to go back to Solid just so I can save on a lot of my computer resources as possible. So let's go ahead, and you want to download those ones I have downloaded down below. And then when you have those downloaded and extracted, we can go ahead and Shift A. I'm going to add a volume and then import OpenVDB, which again is that file format that I was talking about. So we just want to locate wherever you have that saved. And then once you have that folder, we can just double click inside of the subfolder, and you can see again we just have a huge range of VDB files in here. Let's hit A, select all of those, and then import those into the scene. And you might not see that anything has changed, but that's actually because it's, you know, in a frame before. And so let's kind of scrub up to the beginning of our sequence, and you can see this whole kind of, you know, volume of explosion. And so let's just scale that down. So S to scale. I just want to scale that way down so it's more in line with the scale of our actual scene. Let's actually go ahead and start, you know, organizing some of the stuff up here. So I'm going to right click, add a explosions collection, and then let's go ahead and right click, and I want to add a helicopter section. So I'll just name that heli. Of course, let's place the correct objects in there. So my Seahawks I want on the heli section. Of course, I do need to bring all the blades objects into that section as well. So now we have that there, and then of course all my explosions I want to be in this collection. We're actually going to be using this to render out different passes later, so that's why I just like organizing them now. And so let's come back out to the camera view, and I want to place, I want to basically tell when I want the explosions to happen. And so we'll come, I think I want the first explosion to kind of be around this area, around 130. So frame 130 is when I want that to start. So let's go and select our, you know, Embergen gasoline explosion. Let's go to the volume properties, and we can see that we have the density, flames, temperature. We have all of those things that we can actually use for shading of the actual, you know, explosion. Let's go ahead, and I want to start that at frame, we'll do like 125 right now. So right there, and of course we do need to scale it and position it where we want the actual explosion to be. And so let's just Shift Z, move that there. And so now you can see it basically just has the explosion there. I might actually move that up a little bit, so somewhere around there. And now you can see that the explosion basically happens exactly where we want it. And so that is looking pretty good. If I do come out to the render view now, you will see that it's basically just shaded as a smoke object. And that's because we don't have any materials on the actual object. You can basically think as VDB files as, you know, treated the same way as objects. We need to actually have a material for it. So let's bring this window I have over here out again. We can go ahead and hit new. Let's name this, you know, ground explosion. And then you can see right here, since it's detected it's a volume file, it's made a printable volume. You can think of it as a printable BSDF. The most important thing is it's automatically detected the density attribute, and then also our temperature attribute. And so the nice thing about Embergen is when you're you can export out your custom file from the actual program as a VDB sequence, and it'll already have the density and the temperature over here in the attribute section. So of course, what I want to go ahead and do is set the temperature. Now the temperature I'm going to be using today is 2000. Of course, you can play around with that as much as you want. You will notice nothing has actually changed, and that's because we don't have any black body intensity. And black body intensity is basically, for all intensive purposes, the flames of our explosion. I won't get too technical into all of the explosion details and stuff because I'm not too versed in all of the simulation and stuff like that. And so black body intensity, I believe for my testing, I got a 3.7, looked pretty good. Of course, you can play around with this yourself, but just with this one node alone, just changing kind of two values, Embergen is just great with that kind of stuff. So again, highly recommend you guys check it out. So that is looking pretty good. You can play around with some of the other properties like density and stuff like that, but this looks pretty good for my scene. We're actually going to be color correcting and compositing this inside of After Effects to make it look more realistic. So this is what I'm going to leave it as right now. Of course, you do want to make sure that it's kind of at the base of this little thing. We're actually going to be end up, you know, masking that section out and using that separately. And so now that we have that, let's go ahead and add the explosion in midair to this little thing in the background. So of course we need to add another kind of VDB sequence. So Shift A, volume, import, open VDB, and then we have this midair explosion. Let's import all of that in. Again, it is set to be the wrong kind of frame right here. So first, let's scale that down. Then I want to determine where the actual explosion should start. So our helicopter is kind of going up here. So I think right around like 140 or maybe even 130 or somewhere around that range is when I actually want the explosion to start. So again, midair explosion selected. Let's make the start frame. We'll do 130 for now and see how that looks. And so yeah, that looks pretty good. Pretty good place of where it should start. I might actually increase it to like start at like around 140, we'll say, just so it's on the very edge of the screen, so we don't have to deal with the animation of the helicopter and stuff like that. So that is looking pretty good. What I do want to go ahead and do is set this to basically follow the helicopter that we have up here. So I'm gonna just move that around right there, and then let's position it up to our helicopter now. So right there, and then we'll put it over here to our helicopter. We do want to make sure it's kind of rotated the right way like that, and you will see like these like shooting out things right here. That's basically the front of the explosion and stuff like that. So we do want to make sure that that is kind of positioned correctly. And so once you have it at like a pretty cool spot, so right here for me, what I'm going to go and do is just parent this VDB to the actual helicopter so it'll follow it a little bit. So what we can do is I want to select this helicopter and then this VDB sequence. Of course, I do want the helicopter to be yellow, and Control P, parent to object. And so now when it starts, basically the explosion is going to stay on the helicopter at all times. And since it goes off the screen so quick, it doesn't really matter that, you know, it isn't following the laws of physics. So that looks pretty good. Again, we haven't shaded it. If you remember, we don't have any materials applied. So what I want to go and do is let's, you know, select this new material. I'm just going to name this air explosion. This actually might be a good time to go and save. And then, of course, everything is set again. I want to go ahead and set, I believe my black body intensity was a 3.2 for this, and then density of like a 2.5 or something like that. Of course, we do have to change the temperature back up to 2000. So I believe that's the settings I use for that specific one. It's really, you know, kind of whatever result that you want to be looking for. But I think this looks pretty cool right there. So of course, what we want to do now is, now that we have everything set up, we want to go ahead and render out in different passes. And so in order to do that, I'm going to be rendering an explosion pass and then a helicopter pass. And so let's go ahead and do that. So if I come up to the compositing tab, I'm going to go ahead and remove the movie clip and alpha over. Since we're not going to be doing our compositing inside of you know, Blender for this tutorial, we're going to be taking it inside of After Effects to get a realistic result. But let's go ahead, I want to Shift D, duplicate this out, and then you'll notice that we have this foreground collection that's kind of something default that comes with Blender. We can actually come back out to the layout, and I actually want to have two different view layers. I want to have a helicopter view layer, so I'm going to name this one Heli. And so for this view layer, think of view layers as basically just like duplications of your scene that you can turn off different collections for the different objects that you need to render for passes inside Blender. So what I want is, for the Heli section, I don't want the explosions at all. So now we have that. Let's go ahead and make a new view layer. So right click, make a new. We're going to go ahead and name this one just explosions. And then of course we just want the opposite. We don't want any helis, we just want the explosions. So now in compositing, we can change this one to be explosions. Of course you can't see anything, and that's actually because we haven't rendered out an image. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so once it is black, it is done rendering. Let's go out here, and then of course if I hit V, we can zoom out of here. But now we have the helicopter kind of pass right here with both of those, and then we also have the explosions pass right here. So we have the one on the ground and then one in the air. So that is looking pretty good. Of course you can render these out kind of separately. I believe for my thing, the explosions took way longer to render, so I actually did a lower sample count than the helicopter. However, I'm going to be showing you how to render them at the same time with the same sample count if you do want to do that. So let's go ahead, Shift A, let's add a file output node. So what this node is going to allow us to do is it's basically going to replace our composite node right here. So let's go select this file output node. Let's go to node and then properties, and we can see that we have all of this information here. We can set a base path, so make sure to set that wherever you want to save out your individual passes. And then the file format, I'm just going to save as a PNG. You could of course save it as OpenEXR, which is kind of like the industry standard lossless format, or if you want to take it in like Nuke or like DaVinci or anything. I believe even After Effects has multi-layer compositing capabilities, but that's a whole like different section of compositing. So I'm just going to leave it as PNG for me, since PNG is again a lossless format. Of course, let's add a new input since we're going to be rendering out two separate passes. We can name them. Let's name this one heli, then underscore. It's very important to put that underscore because again, it's going to change. It's going to separate our actual name of our clip from the frame range that it's going to put at the end. So the first frame is basically going to be called heli underscore 0001 or whatever we put there. And so then let's name this one explosion underscore right there. And so now of course you do want to make sure you save it in a base path. I'm not going to put that since I've already rendered it. And then let's put the heli into the heli pass and the explosion into the explosion pass. And then you do want to make sure you still have this composite layer. For whatever reason, there's a glitch inside of Blender that if this isn't plugged into anything, then it's actually not going to render the file output node. It's just again a glitch. And do remember, whenever you're kind of changing the export settings or anything, you always want to do it in the file output node properties instead of the output properties here, since the output properties here are only for this composite node. And so now that we have everything set up here, we can actually go ahead and render the final animation. Okay, so once that has finished rendering on your end, one thing I do want to point out before we go inside of After Effects is that the last frame of our actual, camera track sequence is 200. So basically that means that the last frame range of our, heli pass and also our explosion pass is going to be 200 and not, the end of the footage. I believe it was like 230 something, yeah, 230 something. And so that's very important. We must remember that for After Effects. Okay, so now finally inside of your compositing program of choice, I'm going to be using After Effects today. Of course, I usually use Nuke for kind of my more advanced level shots. However, I thought using After Effects would be easier for you beginners out there, since After Effects is a lower barrier of entry. So let's go ahead and just import some of the clips in. I'm just going to go to the file browser and go ahead and import some of those in, since that's the way I like doing it. So of course I want to import my image sequence in first, so I have them kind of already organized into their own folders. Let's go to my render section where I actually save the different passes. Now I went ahead and save the different image sequences in their own folder. So if I come in here, these are all the heli passes, and then in my other folder is just all the explosion passes like that. So let's just drag and drop both of those folders inside of here. Very important thing is that it automatically sets the frame rate to be 30, is the kind of default range for image sequences. So of course my footage was actually shot in a 24 FPS. So what we can do is right click, then interpret my footage, go to main, and assume this frame rate. We want to assume this to be 24 frames per second, and now you can see that's the correct number. We just want to make sure that we interpret all of those to be 24 FPS, just kind of like a weird thing inside of After Effects. And I do believe if you do work with a lot of footage, you can actually set it to be default to 24, but that's how you change it if it's not. So let's go ahead and drag our base footage and add a new composition. Okay, so now you see that we have our footage in our kind of layer system down here. Let's go ahead and import the explosion layer, then also our heli layer. And so, of course, if you remember, like I was saying before, it's very important that we remember that 200 frame number. And that is actually to go ahead and line up everything. Because as you can see right now, we basically have explosions and our heli not aligned at all. It's actually a pretty cool effect, if I do say so myself. But, of course, we want to align that as much as possible so we can actually align the camera track. So, of course, you can set this to be frame numbers down here. I just have it on seconds as a default. But an easy way to see, right down here, you can see this little number right here, the 144. If we change that, we want to go all the way up to 200. So right there is my range. I'm just going to go ahead and press this button to set a marker, and then I want to basically align it so that all of my layers are basically ending at 200. right there. And so that now we know that the camera track is actually aligned and everything is going to look correctly. And so you should have something like this where we actually have the helicopters going and then the explosions. Of course, we do have the problem where we can actually see the helicopters and explosions on top of the buildings and everything. And so what we basically need to do is create what's called a holdout, and that's if you think of it as basically taking your footage and then cutting portions out of it and then placing those portions on the very top of everything that covers up all of the other stuff. That's basically how holdouts work. And so let's just go talk about how to create one real quick. So inside of After Effects, we want to go ahead and Control C, Control V, duplicate our layer just so we have a new layer. I want to, let's first just do the explosion right here, since that might be one of the easiest ones to do. I basically just want the range of this footage where the explosion is going to be. And so if we want to start our kind of footage right here in line with our explosion, and we can just go until it kind of goes off screen where it's not really important anymore. So like right there, we'll notice that like the building isn't going to be seen, so we don't need the holdout anymore in that section. So of course I'm going to just bring this layer right to the end here, and now we can actually worry about kind of rotoscoping this to only mask out the section of the building. Now I'm super lazy. You can of course do the pen tool right here, but again I'm super lazy, so I'm going to be using the rotobrush tool. So in order to use that, let's double click inside of this layer, and then let's go to the very first frame of our sequence, and of course I want to be masking out this section over here. So the nice thing about Rotobrush, it's actually this button, I don't know why I clicked the other button, but the nice thing about Rotobrush is that it kind of uses AI and a bunch of detection features to actually go ahead and automatically detect stuff. So if I go ahead and just select out this area right here, you can see this pink outline, and that's basically the outline that it's going to be masking. Now with Rotobrush 3.0, it's fantastic now. Like it's like amazing. So you do want to make sure you're in 3.0. Now for this, I found that not using motion blur actually caused some artifacts and stuff like that, so I'm going to be turning that off for all of my masking, but usually you would use motion blur for like people moving and stuff like that. But as you can see, it's done a really good job of selecting that edge, and again, you just want to make sure that's all aligned here, and we're just worrying about this section right here. We don't really care about these sections over here, but that's going to be covering up the entirety of our explosion, so we don't have to worry about that. Now, if we come to like a different frame, if we go up a frame, you can see that it will try to auto calculate to the next frame, and it now, we have 2 frames. So we can keep doing that, making sure it's accurate. I actually have faith that it's going to be as accurate as possible, since this is a pretty easy roto cleanup for it. So I'm going to go ahead and just hit freeze. And what freezing is going to do is basically just, kind of bake in those frames and lock them in and create a mask for us. You can actually see it's done a pretty good job of getting some of the buildings over here. We're not going to be using it for that since we are going to kind of break up the holdouts into different sections. But now you can see that it's basically gone throughout our entire range and selected that kind of building edge right there. And so that's super easy, kind of, almost a one-click fix for that. And so now what we can see is nothing has really changed, and that's because our layer is actually below the explosion layer. And so of course all the holdouts are going to be at the very top of our kind of sequences and stuff. So let's go ahead, and I just want to select that to be right there. And now you can see, since it's above everything, we actually have the holdout blocking out the explosion. You will see some artifacts and stuff right there, and that's actually to do with some of the pixels. I shot this at 1080, and so if you had it at 4K, it wouldn't be as big of an issue. But of course, to fix that, let's just shift the edge down a little bit just to not reveal some of those areas. And so that is looking really good, and kind of a super fast and easy method. And so of course we have that down, but we haven't done some of the other areas, such as this side of the building and stuff like that. So it's the exact same process for all of these. You basically just want to duplicate this thing again. We want to position it exactly where it's needed. So I'm going to start at the start of my thing here, and then right here is kind of the last frame where it's needed, where the helicopters aren't on the edge of it anymore. So let's just bring that right here. And then of course we can double click inside of the layer, and then let's just grab all of this stuff right here. This one I believe was a little bit finicky, the most finicky out of all the kind of edges and stuff. But after some trial and error, I think you'll find that it's does a pretty good job. And so that looks pretty good. I might also select like this top in case it goes up there. But again, let's just go ahead and freeze this so it actually develops a mask. If it does mess up for any reason, you can actually go like frame by frame and add and fix it and stuff. But let's see. I think it does a pretty good job for what I need it for. So now again, let's come back out to the composite that we have. Put this at the very top. You do want to make sure you don't kind of shift it around. So right there. And now you can see that it's basically blocking out these sections right there. We do want to make sure there's no like little line or anything, but that looks pretty good. And so finally we need to do it one more time to the very end where the helicopter goes back over the building. You can see it actually does a pretty good job from our other mask that we have, this one right here. But if you can see right there, it kind of goes away since we didn't do all that. So let's go ahead and do it one more time. So Control C, Control V. I need it to start like right around this frame. So that's like the frame before where it goes in the building, and then like right there, just to the end of our kind of helicopter thing. So again, let's double click inside of there, go to the first frame, and then let's just select this area over here, something like that, and freeze the footage. Okay, so once that's done, let's come back out here and let's place this layer on the very top. And we should see that all of our holdouts are now looking pretty good. And it looks like the actual visual effects are in the scene now. So that is very good. What I'm going to go and do is just select all my holdouts. I like to go ahead and just organize everything. So let's pre-compose. I'm just going to name these holdouts. And we didn't do it inside of Blender. Blender uses a lot of holdouts too. So if I did like 3D track this scene very accurately and stuff, I could actually model out the buildings and stuff like that. And so now that we have that, we are actually ready to start doing some final compositing and final touches to make this look more realistic. So first thing I notice is I want the explosions on top of my helicopters. So let's switch those layers around. And let's go ahead and color correct some of our explosions. So I'm going to go to Effect, Color Correction, and go down. First, I noticed they're way too saturated. And so let's desaturate that. So a hue saturation node, just turn down the saturation. Somewhere around there is looking good. Just more realistic. Something like that. I might actually change it up a little bit more. So that looks good. Let's go ahead and add a new effect. I'm going to go to Color Correction and Levels. This is just the kind of tool I like to use the most. I'm just going to decrease the gamma just a little bit. Or sorry, I guess that's increasing it. Somewhere around that. And so now if I go ahead and like turn those on and off, you can see that this is what we had before, and now this is what we have, just blending it into the environment, how it would actually be seen in the camera much better. So that is looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and do the same thing for our helicopters. So let's select the heli layer. I'm going to go to Effect, and we'll go to Color Correction Levels. And this is where I want to go ahead and break it down by channel. So this is where we're going to be removing that green at the bottom and then having some more blue hues into there. So let's go to the red channel, go up here to the red channel, and then let's affect this middle slider just ever so slightly like that. Let's go to the green channel. This is where we're going to be removing that green. So let's go ahead and brighten that up a little bit. Or sorry, we're going to decrease that a little bit. So somewhere around there, I'm kind of just eyeballing it, see what feels right. And then blue, I think we need to increase the blue. So let's go to the blue channel and let's just make this lighter. So something like that. And so since we increased both of the red and blue channel, but decreased the green channel a little bit, it's colored it in a little bit better. That's way too much on the blue. So I'm actually going to go back to the blue and do something like that. And so now you can see that it's basically just colored it in a little bit better. What I also might do is go back out to the RGB section, just boost the gamma just a little bit. And so now this is the result I'm kind of getting with my color correction. Of course, I could, break this down further and, get way advanced into the color, but that's pretty good for this section of the tutorial. Of course, the final thing that I do have to do is get this like white little blob overexposed area out. Now, if I was going back to film this again, I would probably try to avoid this as much as possible, since flares and blown out areas are very hard to achieve inside of visual effects and make it look right. I'm going to try to do my best to mimic what I think it might look like, but of course it's kind of like one of those areas. Do you want it to be more realistic, or do you want it to look better, if that makes sense? And so in order for me to do this or whatever, what I'm going to do is let's go ahead and add a new solid layer. I'm just going to select this white color up here. That's okay. I'm going to put that above everything, I believe. And then what I actually want to do is I want to just select the area where the actual, blown out part is. So in order to do that, let's hit T down here. That will basically make me change the opacity. So that is down there. Let's go ahead and select the ellipse tool. And then if I just kind of click and drag that, we have that kind of, roughly where this is going to be. This is where we can like play around with the size and everything. And let's go ahead and change the opacity all the way back up. And so now that we have this on top of everything, you can see it's kind of clipping out the wing of our helicopter. So let's make the feather way up. Something like that. I need to play around with the size. This is just kind of like a little finicky thing. The nice thing about kind of this workflow is that we're not actually going to see this white thing. We're basically using this as kind of a mask for coloring the heli. And so we can do that. That's looking pretty good. I might need to feather it just a little bit more. So that looks pretty good. Now we actually need to make this thing, move with the actual camera track, the shot. Now I tried camera tracking inside of After Effects, like tracking a dot and stuff. It just became way too complicated. And since this is roughly kind of a smooth movement, I'm just going to be kind of manually setting keyframes for its position. So if I select this layer and hit P for position, we can hit this little clock icon down here, and that'll set a keyframe. I basically just want to come and set this to basically follow that little blown out white bit every like 10 frames or something like that. We're going to be playing around with this for a little bit. Again, doesn't need to be super accurate, just accurate enough. So like right there. And then it ends like right here. And so that looks pretty good. I just set a couple keyframes. You can, of course, get really involved, or even better, go and track it to a point like this, kind of edge right here. But that is looking pretty good, just fast and easy kind of method. And so again, like I said, I'm not going to be using this to actually be seen as a thing. You can see it's basically just overexposing everything, and we can't even see our helicopter anymore if I hide and unhide that. So what I actually want to use is what's called a track matte inside of After Effects. And what that basically does is it basically turns this layer into a mask rather than an actual physical visible layer. So what I basically want to do is I want to have two heli layers. So let's go ahead and duplicate our helis. And so now you can see that's basically added some more transparency. You do want to watch out, since if I toggle this on and on, you can see that our blades don't look as good anymore. So what I basically want to do is I want to have two different layers, one for the color of this out here, and then one for the heli color to be inside of this overexposed area. First of all, let's go ahead and unhide our white solid layer, so we're not seeing that anymore. And so what's basically happening right now is we have two layers. We need to tell each layer that we're going to use this second layer, so our white solid layer, as a mask. So to do that, if you don't see this track matte section over here, we can toggle the switches and modes until you see here. And what we want to do is we want to set this one to be a track matte of our second. And so now you can see that we basically, if I unhide the other one, you can see that everything outside of it is no longer seen, and then everything inside of it is seen. And so we basically want to do the same exact thing, but have the mask inverted for our other layer. So let's go and do that. I'm going to go to the white solid layer, and you can see it's doubling up those layers again. Let's go ahead and click this button, which is going to invert that. So now if I unhide that layer, we basically have the same exact thing in our heli layer. You can see that we have basically two separate layers right there. You can see a little bit of a edge right here, and so that's not too big of a deal. This is normally how you wouldn't operate. This is kind of just a special use case scenario. But now that we have like kind of one layer or two layers combining into one using this white solid as a mask, what we can go and do is color them differently. So if you remember, this is the side that is going to be inside of this overexposed area. So I want to select that layer, and I want to color correct this differently than the other layer. So let's go ahead and play around with some of these settings. So I might affect the output black a little bit, bring the I'll leave the output white, might overexpose this gamma down there, and push the white over here to kind of be more overexposed. So now you can see we're starting to lose some of the more highlight areas. However, some of the darker areas are still being exposed by the camera, which is as close as we can get it without going too advanced into it. So now you can see, if you want to copy my settings here, I might also change the black down just a little bit more, since I don't like the way that black is looking. But now you can see we basically have this layer is basically just being seen in that mask section we put before, and then this layer is being seen outside of it. And so all of that to say is, now when it goes inside of there, it's more overexposed. And so of course, this probably isn't the most exact way to do it, but it does give us a pretty cool result, and it's the one I'm going to stick with. So finally, the final thing that we need to do, now that we have everything set up and everything is composited and looks pretty cool, we can go ahead and finally do some final touches to match it to the footage as closely as possible. And so I want to take all of my CG passes, and I want to add a grain to it, because even though you can't really see it too much here, we have a lot of film grain on it. And so of course, with my CG passes, we have a few film grain, but it's not moving film grain. And without getting too technical into it, we basically want to match the moving film grain of my footage onto the CG, so that the two basically look like they were filmed in real life. And so what I'm going to do real quick is I'm going to take all my CG layers, and so we're going to take the two heli layers I made and the explosion layer. We're going to right click and pre-compose those. I'm just going to name those CGI. So now we basically have our holdouts on top of everything. We have this white solid layer that, again, is not being viewed at all. It's just being used as a mask. And then we have this CGI layer that's basically containing all of our CG. And so if I turn that off, it'll basically remove the explosions and the helicopters and everything that we have inside of there. Of course, if you do want to go in and affect the effects and everything, you'll see that if I select the CGI layer, they're all gone and everything. So you'll just have to double click inside of there and then go and mess around with the effects in here. So now that we have all that set up, let's go ahead and add a new effect, and we're going to go to grain. Where is that? Noise and grain. We're going to go match grain. And of course, I place that on the CGI layer, and because I did pre-compose everything, it's going to be affecting the explosions along with the helicopter and everything like that. So of course, we have this little box right here, and that's kind of the preview window. So you can see it's adding a few grain right here. What I want to go and do is, let's go ahead and set this to be final output. So it affects everything right here. And then the noise source layer, very important. We want that to be our number 4, which is our base kind of footage layer. I don't know if I turn this on and off, you can see it a little bit. You can see it adding a little bit of noise. Again, I don't know if YouTube is going to pick that up, but it's just matching that a little bit more closely. And so that is looking pretty good and pretty accurate. Of course, you can go in and color correct this yourself, but I'm not going to be going over that in this tutorial. But this is a pretty cool result, for the time we spent on it. So now let's just render out the final image. So I'm going to go to File, let's go to Export, Add to Render Queue, and then you can of course mess around with these settings. Since I'm going to be uploading it to YouTube and all that stuff, I'm just going to be saving it as a H.264. So then I want to click inside of here and specify where I want this to actually be saved. Once you have that and you have named wherever you want it to be saved, you can save that. And then finally, we just want to go ahead and render the final animation. Okay, so here is the final shot that we got from today's tutorial. I hope that you guys got a similar result or learned a thing or two on the way. Now this is the part where I ask you to please like and subscribe, and if you want to support the channel more, I also have a Patreon down below, which I'd greatly appreciate it if you guys consider following. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.